welcome to the Innerfire Podcast. My name is Hannah Mathis, and I am joined by my dad, Scotty Carroll, today. We've gained quite a few new listeners recently, so for those of you who may not be aware, my dad, Scotty, is the president and founder of the ministry, and I am kind of the person who does the legwork. I do the video editing, quite a bit of the writing, just the technical stuff behind the scenes, and he's more the visionary.
She does all the work and I just approve it.
Yeah, so we just wanted to get together today and talk about some cultural issues that Christians are facing. We know that we live in a very hostile environment right now, and so how do we respond to these things? How do we stand up for what we believe in a way that honors God? But to begin, especially for the benefit of our new listeners, we're just going to talk about what exactly Innerfire is all about and why you started this ministry.
So Innerfire Ministries, the basis for our name comes from Jeremiah 20:9, where Jeremiah said the word was like a fire shut up in his bones. When we look at the culture around today, we look at how the church is engaging it, how families are being impacted. There's something that rises up inside of us that says we need to address this from a biblical standpoint, from a biblical worldview. And so that's what we're really trying to do as a ministry, is to get people engaged in their faith. We believe that when people engage in their faith in a real and authentic way, that it's going to have a tremendous impact on their families. It's going to have an impact on their communities, and basically everybody that they contact will be impacted. Conversely, if we only go to church on Sunday, we attend services there, we hear the word preached, but we don't go outside and take our faith, make our faith real, then we're not going to have any impact. We're going to be kind of bulldozed by the culture. Those actions actually will have a negative impact on those around us, I believe, because we'll be viewed as more hypocrites than as authentic Christians, which I believe is, hurts more than it helps. So we're just really trying to get people to understand what it means to engage their faith in the broader culture, and to tie that action together with some very important results that we need to be looking at coming down the road.
Something you've talked about a lot in previous podcasts that maybe is a phrase not everyone uses on the daily, so they may not know what it means, is integrating their faith. So why do you use that phrase so much, and what does it mean?
Integrating your faith from a biblical standpoint, I think about Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 5, where he talks about loving God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and then teaching our children these things, and then doing that consistently, when we rise up, when we lie down, when we go in, when we go out. I'm not quoting the verse exactly, but he speaks to that, is the faith should be part of our everyday life. In the New Testament, I believe it's in 1 Corinthians and in Colossians, it talks about whatsoever we do as unto the Lord, whether we're eating, whether we're drinking, whatever we're doing. And so we can't just have a faith that we take to church with us on Sunday, and then when we walk out, we set it on the shelf. Some of the people that I have valued the most in my life have been people that are consistent no matter what situation they were in. Mm-hmm. That is what we should be striving to be as Christians. So when we're at church on Sunday morning, we shouldn't have a facade up. We should be who we are, right? And then if we bump into the same people we see at church on Sunday, if we see them at work on Monday or at school or in Walmart or anywhere else, we should be that same person. When we're hanging out with our friends on the weekend, doing our hobbies or whatever we might be involved in, we should be that same person. It's when we start to live two different lives that we know that we're in trouble from a spiritual standpoint. We need to be consistent across all of our life. I think it's so important, and maybe we'll get into this as we go along, But being that real and authentic person is how you impact others spiritually, especially your kids. If you have kids in your home, your family knows who you are. You know, you might cover up who you are at church. You might even cover up who you are at work. But when you're at home, people know what's underneath the facade, right? And so it is so important to live out your faith in that arena so that your family understands that you're not just doing something because it's the religious thing to do, but because you really believe it. You know, I think that if we want to know what we believe, we should look at what we do, because our beliefs should inform our actions. And so if our actions don't line up with what we're actually saying we believe, we might really ask ourselves the hard question of, do we really believe it, or are we just giving it lip service? And so that's what we're trying to get people to understand, just really to connect the dots between the different parts of their life and understand the longer term impacts of doing that.
Along the lines of that, as modern American Christians, how have we gotten to this point where our faith is not integrated, and it seems like many of us, including myself at times, have been lulled into complacency?
I think there's a long history here, and so it's not necessarily a short, succinct answer. But I think to understand it, you have to go way back. When I say way back, I mean 50, 60 years back, when the American culture looked a lot like the American church. You really couldn't really tell the difference, and I guess some people might argue that's where we're at today.
Yeah.
But if you just go back to that time and look at what the church believed, what the church said it stood for, and then you looked at the greater culture.
General lifestyle.
General lifestyles, those things aligned, okay? Yeah. And then the culture began to slip away from that in many different areas. And so in a lot of cases, the church just went with it. I think the underlying issue is that we don't understand how little small steps ultimately take us to a destination, right? I mean, we have real trouble in this country if you just look at dieting, right? We have trouble understanding how eating a piece of cake is going to possibly make me overweight, bring on all these different health issues like diabetes or anything that might be associated with being overweight.
We look at the short term.
We look at the short term. We eat a piece of cake, and 10 minutes later, we just are happy we had a piece of cake. We're no different health-wise, and so we can't project into the future. We don't do a good job. I mean, I could give example after example where that's the case. So from a spiritual standpoint, we let some little things go, right? We begin to do some little things that were not healthy in the long term, but we didn't see an immediate negative result. And as a result, we're now in that long term, and we find that we have become complacent. The church has, in a lot of cases, has embraced liberal ideas rather than standing firmly on Scripture, and we've lost our impact on the culture. You know.
And I would say with the cake analogy, the bad health parts of it were already there 10 minutes later. You just don't see it.
You don't see it. It's such an incremental change. You know, if I'll use an example that my friend has used in the past. If I ask you how is your you're in Matthew's marriage today versus yesterday, right? You will probably say, well, it's about the same, right? If I ask you that question a year from now, you can look back and say, well, it's either better or worse, right? Yeah. Because you've got a lot more time to see the impacts of what's happening today. And I think that's just what has happened to the church. It's just been a slow creep, and that idea of complacency has just taken hold on us.
As the culture continues to shift and slide down, how is the church going to have to change?
Well, I think that question, Hannah, is actually part of the problem, I would think, because I've been guilty of this myself many times, and I know other people are guilty of it. It's easy for us to look and say, how should the church change? Or how should maybe a different institution change? How should the government change? We never flip that around and ask, how should we change? So often...
How should I change?
Yes. We forget that the church is made up of individuals. The United States of America, the government of America, is dependent upon the individual actions of people, right? All institutions are. Institutions are not entities in and of themselves, right? There's people behind them. So I wouldn't say, how does the church need to change? I would ask, how do I need to change? What do I need to do differently? Because if I can make a change that impacts myself first, then impacts my family, then I can begin to reach out into my community, and ultimately the church is going to change. The people that I associate with is going to change in a positive way that can more effectively carry the gospel, right? Because that's what we're really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to get people to understand is that the gospel is a life-changing message, right? And not only just eternally, but in how we live today and in the struggles that we have today, embracing Jesus Christ and His teachings will change our lives for the better. And so that's hopefully that answers the question. It really, we need to take some individual responsibility. And that's part of what we're trying to do as a ministry, is to get people to realize we can make a difference. And in fact, what we do has a tremendous impact on those around us, especially our kids.
Speaking of kids, a cultural shift that I've noticed within the church as a younger Christian is a lot of my friends shifting more to the left, shifting more to the kind of social justice gospel. So what do you think this could mean for the future of the church, and is there anything we can do to change it?
This is a big question. It's a multifaceted answer, I would say. So I'll try to address it as clearly as I can and as succinctly as I can. It links back to our previous question about complacency, because there's just been a general drift which has contributed to the problem. If you look at the more recent history and some of the activism that's going on, I would say that young people see a moral value in some of the causes that have been taken up by the left. They see a passion there that they're drawn to. They see action being taken. They like that. People are drawn to people who are passionate about something. It doesn't matter what you're passionate about, right? If you are passionate and you express that, it draws other people in. And so I think our younger generation is drawn to the passion of the left and how they advocate for certain issues. I think more the conservative right, if you will, and I really hate using that term in this context because I really want to think more in spiritual terms, but the spiritual conservatives, I will say, oftentimes are not very active. We lack action.
Yeah.
We're just busy going about our lives. Sometimes we get a little self-absorbed, and we forget that we're put here to do things, to serve others, to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And so when our younger generation looks at us, they don't necessarily see that passion in us to get out and make the world a better place. And so that's one thing that I think draws the young people to the left. I think the left also is much more ideological than us. which can be a dangerous thing in that they tend to oversimplify the world and kind of divide the world in halves. You know, you hear a lot today about oppression and oppressors. And when you take a stance like that, and I'm just pulling that out of one issue that we could talk about, but it serves well for this example. If you divide the world into oppressors and the oppressed,
It makes things easy.
it makes things very simple, right? And of course, you don't want to be on the oppressor standpoint or side of the fence. And so when you're not an oppressor, it gives you the moral high ground, right? And also it gives you the intellectual high ground in that you believe you have the ability to divide people into two groups.
There's kind of an answer for everything.
It gives you an answer for everything. And so it takes a person who probably really doesn't understand all the issues, and it makes them an expert, right? It simplifies it to the point that everybody can be an expert. And so when we like to be experts, you know, and we like immediate results. So rather than putting in the work to really understand the intricacies of the problems that we face as a society, because let's be very clear, the problems that we face are not simplistic problems. They're very complex. They're very difficult to solve. They're not going to be easy solutions. But when we oversimplify them and make them easy, then it makes experts out of people. They feel good about themselves. Oftentimes, a lot of these issues, by taking the right side, if you will, people feel like, I mean, quite honestly, it's become like a religion in and of itself.
Yeah.
Because people feel good that they're doing the right thing, that they're doing good, and therefore it becomes religion-like. And thus, in my opinion, a lot of the fervor that you see is very much like some of the religious fervor that we've seen in days past when we had, nationwide revivals and those kind of things. So I think that's part of the issue as well. If I boiled it down just to what I can do to help stop this slide or to help bring young people back more to being grounded in Scripture and what I would say conservative values, I need to be a real, authentic person with a passion for living out what I believe. Mm-hmm. I believe if I do that, then the people that are around me will see that, young and old, will be drawn into that and come alongside me to help. Mm-hmm. So that's a kind of a long answer. Hopefully it was clear enough to make sense.
Yeah. And some may be listening to this podcast saying, I thought this was a ministry. Why are they talking about politics left and right? What does this have to do with the Bible? What would you say to that? Like, why is this important enough that we're talking about it right now?
Well, I think the issues that we're talking about, there's a lot of spiritual implications here, right? And a lot of the issues that we see on the table today are directly confronting what we believe as Christians, mm-hmm. right? They're challenging our beliefs. They're challenging the authenticity of the Scriptures. Mm-hmm. They're, in many cases, even challenging the existence of God, the existence of a moral absolute. And, so all these issues, I think, honestly come back to how do we view God's Word? How do we view God Himself? And quite honestly, I think, especially on our young people, I really feel like there's a crisis of identity.
Sure.
Right? We're searching for who we are as people and as humans, and part of that comes because we have disconnected from being made in the image of God. We do not know who we are relative to God. And because of that, we're searching out all these other things, and as a result, we get a lot of these cultural issues rise up. Now, here's why it's important to me. Peter tells us that we have an enemy that is like a roaring lion, and he's out seeking whom he can destroy. That's how I view the culture relative to my children and soon to be my grandchildren, I see the culture trying to devour them and trying to pull them away from the truth of God and who Christ is. And that motivates me. I mean, if you want me to get motivated, come after my family, right? And I feel like that's what the culture is doing. They're coming after my family to try to pull them away from the truth of the Bible. And what I want our listeners to understand is that how we integrate our faith, how we address these cultural issues, I mean, we cannot underestimate the impact that that's going to have on our kids and our grandkids and the others around us. I mean, it is not far-fetched to say the lives of our kids are at stake. I mean, we can't sit on the sideline and let somebody else address this. We have got to accept the challenge. We've got to live out our faith. We've got to be the one. We just can't depend on somebody else to take care of our own family. We've got to stand in the gap and do that.
Sure. Well, we've kind of been talking about all these things in general terms. Let's bring it down more to the ground level, things that are actually happening in the world. So maybe about a week or so ago in the news, Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company, announced that they would not be selling their ice cream in Judea and Samaria because it is, quote, inconsistent with their values, end quote, for their product to be sold in occupied Palestinian territory. And this is not a surprise. Ben & Jerry's has been a very far left company for a long time, and there are many others like them. So as Christians, how do we respond to this? Do we ignore it? Do we say, I'm not going to buy Ben & Jerry's ice cream anymore? What do we do?
Well, this is a big question. We see a lot of, cancel culture coming from the left. The question is, do we boycott, from the right, do we boycott these companies, or what action do we take? Well, let's address the boycott issue first, right? Because it's a question that comes up. Should we boycott a company because they did this particular thing that we don't agree with? Well, I would kind of answer that question. If somebody said, should I boycott this company? I guess I would turn it back around rather than giving a definitive yes, no answer. I would want to ask the question, what would that company, we'll just take Ben & Jerry's in this instance, if this is not something that would make you not buy their product, what would they have to do for you not to buy their product? Right? That's really the more important question, I believe. Yeah. And here's the reason, because it goes back to the whole complacency issue, right? And this particular question does not just apply to the companies that we do business with. It applies to our public institutions like the public schools, right? What would the public school have to do? What would they have to teach before you would not send your kids there? What would your sports teams that you participate in, maybe they're not affiliated with the school, what positions would they have to take? What would the Boy Scouts have to do before you wouldn't let your kids be a part? What would your church have to do before you said, I can't agree with that, I'm going to have to look for a different church or go a different way? If I look back we go back to the 50 or 60 years ago, I would suspect there are a lot of people there that if you had asked them that question 60 years ago, relative to some of the things our institutions are doing now, they would immediately say, I would not participate in that. I would not allow my kids to participate in that. But we're somewhat like the proverbial frog in the pot of water that's being slowly heated, right? We never jump out until it's too late to jump out and our goose is cooked, so to speak. You know,
Interesting analogy.
I think we have to take some time to ask ourselves some of these questions and say, where do I draw the line? Where is the point where I no longer participate in what the culture is doing? Mm-hmm. And that answer, I believe, is going to be different for different people because we're in different places, we're in different circumstances, we're in different places from a spiritual maturity standpoint. But no matter where you are at, you've got to ask yourself that question. You know, let's take in the entertainment industry as an example. You know, I know a lot of Christians, including my own kids, who take in more entertainment than I do, mm-hmm. right? Who probably watch some things that I don't approve of. And I know from a broader standpoint, there are a lot of Christians that watch stuff that I do not approve of. Mm-hmm. So I would ask the same question there. Mm-hmm. Whatever your favorite TV show is or favorite movie, what would they have to do in that movie for you not to watch it anymore? How bad would it have to get? You know, some of the shows that Christians regularly partake of, they got some pretty bad content. You know, this is kind of sad, kind of comical, but we were discussing it earlier. You know, you go back to the I Love Lucy show, I don't know, 60 years ago maybe, they would not show her on camera as being pregnant, right?
And the husband and the wife were in two separate twin beds.
Yes, okay. Today, we show explicit sexual content in probably, I mean, I don't even watch Prime TV, but I guarantee you can see it there in Prime Time TV. You don't have to go to an R-rated movie to get that kind of content.
It's all over Netflix, I can tell you.
All over Netflix. And Christians are consuming that.
Not batting an eye.
So I would ask, what would that TV show or that network have to do for you to no longer view it, to no longer support it, right? And, you know, I'll be honest, we don't like these questions, right? Because we have to ask ourselves where we're at and really do a hard self-evaluation. And sometimes we don't like the answers we get back. And so if we're not liking the answer, we just don't ask the question, right? We like to go in and be culturally relevant when we go into work or school or whatever. We don't like, the answer of I don't watch that or I don't participate in that seems a little awkward or whatever.
And sometimes, I mean, I think just the sheer entertainment value, however cheap that may be, is enough for people to justify it.
Yeah, and so we're talking about some specifics. We're talking about entertainment. We're talking about boycotting companies that we don't agree with their position on things. I think the important thing is that we ask the question to ourselves, what would they have to do for me to take action? Because this is really the point. We've sat on the sideline and done nothing. We've been swept along by the wave, and the world sees that. To me, this may seem old school to people. Maybe it doesn't. But you cannot sit in your home on a Friday night and watch a TV program that is essentially soft pornography and then tell your kids not to view pornography, mm-hmm. right? It's like, the old do as I say, not as I do, simply does not work, right? So the things that we're doing, do we see how the little incremental steps are connecting the dots to bigger, grosser sins that lead to vast problems? Mm-hmm. This is what people do not see, is that I watch a TV program, and we kind of went from Ben and Jerry's to TV, but, there is a progression that happens where you watch a TV program and the content is not so good, and then that leads a further step down the road, and, you get into things that ultimately lead to things like divorce and adultery and fornication and these kind of things. And it starts because a seed gets planted in your mind, right? And we're not connecting those dots. But the dots are there and they're real. And we're going to have some self-discipline and a little bit of just resolve in ourselves to limit what we take in. You know, while we can talk about computers and say garbage in, garbage out, and we think that's okay to say for a computer and not imagine that with our own self, I don't really understand. So what I would challenge people to do is to take do a self-evaluation for a week and look at what you're putting into your mind. You know, one way to judge the content that we're taking in is to fill our mind with some good things. You know, if we're daily spending time in the Word, we're reading good books that train us both spiritually and morally, we're taking in high quality material, then it's much easier to spot the bad stuff. If we're only taking in bad stuff, we grow accustomed to that and we lose our reference point. So I challenge people to do a weekly evaluation and see how much content you're putting in that's good, how much is bad, and be real honest with yourself about that. You know, I'll throw something else on the table, and then I am going to come back to boycotting. I'll throw something else on the table as a question that would be a shocker to a lot of people, but I really like to hear people's opinion on this. Where in the Bible does it tell us to entertain ourselves? Where in the Bible does it say, take a few hours out and just watch a mind-numbing TV show? Mm-hmm. You know, my looking at the Bible, when I see the examples of people needing a refresh and needing to renew and reconnect, they're not doing mindless things.
They weren't on TikTok.
They're not mindlessly browsing Facebook or TikTok or watching a TV program. I mean, what did Jesus do? Jesus went out into the wilderness by himself and connected with God. That is what renewed him. That is what refreshed him. That is what prepared him to go back and do ministry again. It wasn't just disconnecting from the world, right? So we really need to ask that question. You know, back on the boycotting issue, the question is, does boycotting do any good, right? Well, me personally, I have participated in some boycotts, and boycotts only work if a large number of people join together to do them. As far as when I say they only work, I mean they only bring about a change in the company if you get a large enough group of people together that there is an obvious impact to the company's bottom line. Mm-hmm. Most times that doesn't happen, okay? Now, my personal conviction is if company A it aligns with my values and company B doesn't align with my values and they both offer a similar product, I just as soon do business with company A, right? And leave company B for somebody else. So I think those are just some personal choices outside of a boycott. I don't think there's anything wrong with a boycott, but I do think there are much better ways to have an impact than to do a boycott, because the little amount that we do, unless we can assemble a large group, is not really going to have a whole lot of an impact. What I think you can do is to, if you have a company that's doing something you don't like, I think you can give them a call. You know, pick up the phone, write them a letter, go visit them, go into one of their outlets and say, this really is against my values and I don't really want to shop here if you continue doing these things. Now, anytime we do something like that, let me just say this. You need to do it with grace and with kindness. You know, people don't like to be attacked. They don't mind a dissenting opinion, and they'll listen to it a lot better if it is delivered in the appropriate way. And certainly as Christians, we should be delivering those messages in an appropriate way. But to me, that is a much better action than just a boycott. Mm-hmm. And I think that applies to a lot of different areas in life where we have not gotten involved, we have not expressed our faith. I'll use the school system as an example. If they're teaching, if there's a textbook in the school system that we don't like, we can go to a school board meeting. We can go talk to the principal. We can call our state legislature if that is the appropriate thing. And all these things are things that we should be doing. On our one of our recent podcasts, we had Joy Williams, who was a school board member out in the Houston area. And we had a discussion with her about people getting involved and the vast amount of opportunities that there are to have an influence. And that's really what we should be striving for, is to have some influence on our culture that is spiritually positive.
Well, that's a good segue into our next question, which is regarding education. There's a lot in the news right now going on in the public schools. Between coronavirus and critical race theory, and it's all been a little crazy. But so I just wanted to read a few headlines that I found of things happening in public schools. Wisconsin School District provides sexually explicit books to third graders. Material teaches students how to use sex apps. Chicago Public Schools putting free condoms in nearly every school, including elementary. Nation's largest teachers union says it will teach critical race theory in all 50 states, 14,000 school districts. How do Christians respond to this?
Well, I think you respond just the way I was saying a minute ago. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to get involved. Mm-hmm. If you're not willing to get involved, nothing is going to change. Now, what does getting involved look like? You can attend school board meetings, and we're talking about schools specifically, but this is applicable to any kind of institutional issue, right? Mm-hmm. You can go to the meetings, you can write letters, you can make phone calls, and present your case. Now, obviously, this is a lot more involved than, say, doing a boycott or just sitting around home griping about it. Because if you actually are going to do something, you need to do your research, you need to have your facts together, you need to pull an argument together that's cohesive and clear, and you need to understand what the impacts of what they're doing are going to be so that you can articulate that to whoever you're standing in front of. You have to be willing to put yourself out there to do these things. The other thing is, if you're going to go to a school board and you're going to say, we really need you to change this. This is not good for our students. With any kind of negotiation that you're doing, ultimately, your greatest leverage is having the ability to walk away from the deal, right? As I was raising y'all and training y'all up, if we went to buy, say, a car, right, I would always say, look, if you're going to go in and negotiate a deal, you cannot get emotionally connected to that car, right, before the deal is done. Mm-hmm. You've got to go in, present your case, and be willing to walk away. Be willing to walk away is the greatest leverage that you have, and you really, truly have to be willing to do that, right? So in these bigger issues, walking away is sometimes a little bit more complicated. But for something like a school system, there are other options. And some of that goes back to our question earlier is, what would cause us to walk away? What is that line? That's a conversation that we need to have with, our spouse, maybe even with our kids if they're of the right age, maybe get some advice from other people. But there are some things that could happen inside the school district or other institutions that we participate in where we just simply withdraw.
So another headline that I saw recently that is applicable to this conversation, the fashion magazine Marie Claire recently called on movie and TV studios to show more abortions happening on film so that real-life women will not feel hesitant to get abortions themselves. So to you, what does this say about how entertainment can be wielded as a psychological tool of sorts.
Well, we've talked a good bit about the entertainment industry already. One question that often gets asked in this is, does entertainment reflect what the culture is, or does the culture become what entertainment presents to us? I believe that if we kind of look at history, the norm is that entertainment is constantly pushing the envelope in a liberal direction. They're showing things that mainstream people would not say is acceptable, and then 10 years later, it's acceptable, right? So obviously, in cases like you're mentioning here, they're trying to make something normative that should not be, right? They do that by repeatedly showing it to you as normative, right? You see it enough that you think, oh, well, this is just normal behavior.
And I find it interesting that they're just blatantly acknowledging that. They're not even trying to hide it anymore.
Well, I don't know that they've hid it for a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't write articles about it. But, it is what has happened. And, sometimes we do not understand how organized those who are against the faith are in their attacks and in their strategies to undermine the faith. There is an active, organized strategy to disrupt the spirituality of America, to dislodge us from the roots of our faith, to take it out of our history even. And these things are very strategic, they're very planned, they're very targeted. These are not just happenstances that come along. So we don't need to be naive about that. The best thing I think we can do is engage and let our voice be heard with entertainment companies, with the people who advertise on these shows. There are some examples where we've made some positive ground. One example, a few years ago, Hardee's had a lot of very explicit commercials that they were showing, and some Christians made some noise about that. They contacted them, and it took a few years, but eventually Hardee's did back off of those advertisements, and that was a good thing, right? So those are how we can make a positive change, and there are other stories. But we have to be willing to get engaged. We have to be willing to put ourselves out there. And, there are levels of doing this. The very base level, which is what we advocate for, is you've got to have a conversation about these things inside your family. You cannot let your kids go out into the world and only hear the world's side of these things. The next thing I would say is you can't just talk about them. You actually need to be doing something. You need to be living out your faith so that your kids and your other family members and those around you see that what you're saying is real to you and you're living it out. The other things you can do is you can support organizations that are standing up to the culture. Organizations like American Family Association, Alliance Defending Freedom, and many others out there that are taking a stand and fighting these battles. You can support them financially. You can write letters to your legislators. You can write letters to these entertainment companies. You can be proactive that way. One step further, you can go out and run for office yourself. You can sit on a city council or a school board, and you don't have to have, as we heard from Joy Williams, you don't have to have kids on the school board to run for school board. If you have a mindset that says, I want to serve and make things better. We need to understand that all of the different institutions are producing results that impact the broader community. And if we're willing to serve, we can impact the broader community in a better way. And not everybody can do that, different things for different people, but that is an option to be able to get out and get engaged at a high level.
Well, I think that brings us to a good place to kind of wrap things up for today. Do you have any other final thoughts, or?
I do. I just want to reiterate to people that are listening. These issues can get pushed to the side with our daily routines. I have a business that I run. I'm involved in the ministry. I have, a family. I have a farm. I've got probably as many irons in the fire as most people, okay? Yeah. I understand that all of those things can overwhelm us to the point where we feel like we simply don't have time to engage. But I want you to realize that your family is on the line here. I mean, the stakes are exceedingly high. And sitting on the sidelines and allowing the busyness of life to just keep us from engaging is just not a good enough answer. We have got to find the time. Maybe we can't run for a public office. Maybe we don't have time to do that. But you have time to have a 5 or 10 minute conversation with your family about the issues of the day, to tie those back in to a spiritual context and see what's going on there. You have time to write a 5-minute email to your legislator or to a company that you don't agree with. 5 minutes a day would make a difference. And I know that seems crazy, but even more so than that 5 minutes a day is just living out your faith in everything that you do, being a consistent person true to who you believe. And to do that, really we have to depend upon God. We have to depend upon His Spirit. We talk about these things sometimes as if we can just go conquer the world ourselves. That is not the case. We are totally dependent on the Spirit of God working in us to accomplish these things. So that could be a whole podcast in itself, just talking about the power of allowing God to work in us. But I just encourage you, take some action, be intentional, get involved. There's a tremendous amount on the line here. And if we can help you in that, if we can be an encouragement to you in that, we want to do that. One thing that we are thinking of doing is launching a Facebook page, or we actually have a Facebook page now, but getting more involved in that where we can come together as a community to support one another, to show each other some examples of what we are doing, just to make some posts that let us know we're not alone in this fight. It's very important for us to know that there are others standing alongside of us. That's a great encouragement. So that's something we're considering maybe we can do to help folks. You can check that out on Facebook. So we just thank you for listening today, and I'll let you close it out.
Yeah, as always, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our podcast, and leave us a 5-star review. You can go to Innerfire.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and keep up with what we're doing there. If you enjoyed this podcast today, please tell a friend, share it with them. Word of mouth is really the most effective tool that we have to get this out there. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.